Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about physical contact in the elementary classroom.
Here comes the, y'all don't really work like that.
Whoa, definitely not that kind of physical contact. That's not what I'm going to be talking about here. What I'm talking about here is the friendly kind of contact, like a pat on the back or a hug. Now, of course, that seems simple enough, so where do the issues arise? Well, teachers, whether we like it or not, hold a position of power. Now, where there really begins to become a problem is when that power is exploited by a teacher. So, under section 151, 152, and 153 of the Criminal Code, it states that every person who is in a position of trust or authority towards a young person, or is a person with whom the young person is in a relationship of dependency and who, A, for sexual purpose, touches, directly or indirectly, with a part of the body or with an object, any part of the body of the young person, or B, for sexual purpose, invites, counsels, or incites a young person to touch, as above, is guilty and liable to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years. So, while that's a little wordy, it's pretty simple. Just don't intermingle the two at all. Just don't have sex with your students. Don't talk about your sex life with students. Don't try to coerce them into having sex with you. Just don't. So now, being a male in the elementary classroom, which is much more uncommon than having a female teacher in the elementary classroom, I would argue that you often have to be a lot more careful of what you do, as you are watched very, very closely as a male in the elementary classroom. Teaching in a lot of ways can be sexist in that it's viewed as a woman's job to be the caregiver and that sort of thing in society, whereas there's no reason why a male can't be an elementary teacher. Oftentimes, students don't have a male figure in their life, and it can be beneficial to the students. Now, coming along with that, you are scrutinized to a larger extent, which is fine, because to change views of society on the idea that women are the only ones who can teach elementary, first you kind of have to go through some of the rough patches of society looking at you in that way. That's okay. I get it. But to kind of help male teachers and female teachers going into the elementary classroom with what is okay and what is not okay when it comes to physical contact, we're going to kind of look into some of the gray areas of this, because we've spoken about the sexual contact and that, which is obviously big no-no, definitely don't do that. But now we're going to kind of look through some of the stuff that's a little more on the fence, with like hugs, pats on the back, stuff like that. Now you might ask, what does the legislation say about issues like these? Well, not much. So if the legislation doesn't say much, then what does it say? Looking through the Alberta Teacher Association's Teacher Responsibilities, Rights, and Legal Liabilities, it speaks on a couple different topics. Now, as previously discussed, any type of sexual interaction with your students, definitely not okay, illegal, you'll go to jail. What else does it talk about? Well, in Chapter 4, it talks about assault. Now, we've all heard Grandpa's story about, I had to walk both ways uphill to school in the freezing cold just to get the strap. Well, times now are a little bit different than Grandpa remembers exactly. Now, the charge that is most often laid against teachers in regards to assault is common assault. So it is defined by Section 265 of the Criminal Code, and there are 3 elements of common assault. A, lack of consent by the victim, B, intention, and C, an application of force to the victim or the threat of force that the victim believes will be carried out. So basically what that says is, if the student does not consent to the contact, then it's not okay. If there is an intent to hurt the student, it's not okay. And if there's any type of threat involved, it's not okay. Pretty simple. Okay, so now that we've talked about the types of physical contact that are a little more obviously not okay in the classroom, being sexual contact and any type of contact that could be perceived as assault, let's talk about the types of contact that are more friendly, such as hugs and pats, and what does the legislation say about this? Now, as I said before, it doesn't say much. Basically, what the legislation says is that it's up to the teacher's judgment. And of course, a lot of people, authority figures who deal with cases such as common assault and sexual assault in the classroom would advise that you just shouldn't touch your students whatsoever, whether it be obviously in the awful ways such as sexual contact or assault, but they suggest that you shouldn't have any type of contact even in a friendly sense, just to avoid any chance of having litigations against you. Now, of course, this kind of thinking runs counterintuitive to a lot of the beliefs of many teachers. Teachers are caring and they care for their students, and oftentimes what comes along with that is a friendly type of physical contact. Depending on the situation, of course, young kids, they might fall down and get hurt and they want a hug. They're looking at you as their caregiver. Now, I think that in that situation, is it appropriate? Yes. The student got injured and they're looking for someone to console them, so they turn to you and they initiate the hug. I think a lot of times with the judgment of whether or not physical contact is okay, you can look to, is the student initiating the contact? I think if the student initiates the contact, the situation seems appropriate, then of course a hug is okay. Now, if you were to go out and try to initiate hugs with your students just kind of out of the blue, that's probably not so appropriate. This is where the judgment of the teacher needs to come into play. Now, just very quickly to discuss about the positive benefits that physical touch can have on people, on some people. As stated by Jansel and Astrom, hugging may refer to physical sensations, a psychological sense of well-being, and often a positive emotional experience. Now, this isn't the same for everybody, and I think that this is where your judgment as a teacher comes into play. If the student is initiating the hug, they obviously would see that then as a positive emotional experience for them, and if they are not initiating the hug, then maybe they don't see it that way. So I think it's important to look towards who is initiating the hug. If the student is initiating the hug, then I think it's appropriate. So just to wrap up, I'm going to speak on a few of the Alberta Teachers Association's pieces of advice on how teachers are able to avoid these sorts of problems in the classroom. So first off, to be completely familiar with the school boards and schools' policies on discipline, and to document your discipline of students, as oftentimes accusations on teachers are made years, months later, and to have this documentation is for your benefit. And furthermore, to avoid being alone with a student, and if you do have to be alone with a student, just keep your door open, keep blinds and drapes open, and just keep the time to a minimum. Now, unless you have special training or some type of education in counseling students who display signs of serious abuse, whether it be emotional, sexual, that kind of thing, that's something to be brought to your school psychologist, and just use your own judgment and be smart. Thanks for watching.